I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't answer with anger. I just closed the door, turned the key, and listened to him from the other side, calling me unfair. And still, I didn't open it, because by the time he realized what he had lost, I wasn't the same person anymore. I had already died for him, and he for me. What he said to me that day was like a knife wrapped in gift paper. "Mom, this apartment is too big for you alone. You should consider giving it to us. It would be the fair thing to do, don't you think?" And Emily, with that smile that never quite reached her eyes, added, "You could be more comfortable somewhere more appropriate for your age." I felt the world stop for a second, not because of the suggestion, but because of the way it was said. As if my life, my story, my memories were just another piece of furniture in the way. As if I no longer owned anything. But that wasn't the first sign. No, that came much earlier. I remember that night perfectly. I had made my favorite soup pumpkin with ginger. The house smelled of melted butter and toasted bread. I set the table with my porcelain plates, the ones Michael and I bought on our first trip to Lisbon. The tablecloth was white with lace edges embroidered by my mother. Sarah ran down the hallway shouting that she wanted to sit next to me. I smiled. Was I happy, or did I just think I was... Emily helped me in the kitchen, though you could tell she didn't want to get her nails dirty. She had long, wine-colored nails that looked like claws. Daniel was talking on the phone on the balcony, gesturing as if he were negotiating a contract. When he hung up, he approached me with a bottle of expensive wine. "It's a gift, Mom. You deserve it." I found it strange. Daniel was never the thoughtful type, but I thought maybe he was changing. During dinner, Emily praised the living room curtains. So classic, although I would put something more modern, more minimalist. Daniel gave her a nod as if telling her not to overdo it. But I already felt that uncomfortable tingling in my stomach. Not because of what they were saying, but how they were saying it. As if they already pictured themselves living here. Sarah, in her innocence, said something that left me cold. "And where is my room going to be?" "Daddy," Emily corrected her quickly. "When we come to visit Grandma, my love." But her eyes betrayed her words. It wasn't a visit they were imagining. That night, as I was clearing the plates, I noticed Emily had left her purse open on the dining room table. Out of reflex, I went to close it so nothing would fall out. And that's when I saw it. A floor plan of the apartment with handwritten notes. Knockdown hallway wall, open kitchen to living room, master bedroom, Emily and Daniel. I was frozen in place. I said nothing. I closed the purse. I finished washing the dishes and went to bed, but I didn't sleep. I tossed and turned, feeling the weight of every object around me. This was my home, not a property, a sanctuary, a place full of life, love, and loss, too. I watched Michael die here. I took my first steps as a mother here. I held Sarah for the first time here. They couldn't tear it away from me, not without a fight. The days passed, and the signs started coming, small at first, almost unnoticeable. A neighbor asked if I was moving. He said he had seen Daniel, showing the apartment from the balcony, pointing down to the street, and talking about space for an office. I laughed nervously and said it must have been a misunderstanding. But the doubt lingered. Then the doorman told me Emily had asked if there was a way to duplicate the mailbox key. She said it was to help you, Mrs. Linda, but I never asked her for that. One morning I opened my mail and saw a notification from the bank. Someone had tried to access my account from a new device. I called the bank. They told me my ID number had been entered to reset the password. I had to change everything. That's when I knew something very dark was happening. I went to my desk, opened the folder where I keep my documents, and realized 2 papers were missing. The original deed to the apartment and a copy of my will. My heart was pounding in my ears. I called my trusted lawyer, Claire. She told me to meet her at her office. The next day, I arrived with the documents I still had. Claire reviewed everything in silence. She looked at me with an expression that mixed pity and fury. "Linda, your son is trying to transfer the apartment into his name. They used a forged authorization. This is serious." I felt like I couldn't breathe, as if someone had emptied me from the inside out. Claire helped me block any pending transactions. She recommended changing the locks, protecting my accounts, and above all, not confronting them yet. Act like you don't know anything. That will give you an advantage. And so I did. I became invisible. I started recording our conversations. Every visit, every comment from Emily about what she would do with this kitchen, every phrase from Daniel about when we move in here, everything was recorded. I also took pictures of the floor plans, the messages they sent me, the missed calls at strange hours. I saved every piece of the puzzle. One night while Emily was making coffee in my kitchen, as if she owned the place, Daniel dropped his final proposal. "Mom, we've thought about it a lot. This place is too big for you. You could live in a smaller apartment near us. We could even help you with the expenses. But we need this space. It's for the best for everyone." He looked at me as if he were being generous. Emily placed a hand on my arm. "We don't want you to be lonely, just comfortable. And this place, well, it's not suitable for a woman your age." I felt my face burn, but I said nothing. I smiled. I nodded. I told them I would think about it. And that very night, I called Claire. We began the selling process in secret. A friend of Claire's, an expat, was looking for a spacious apartment in the area. She saw it in photos. She fell in love. I told her the situation. She said, "Let's do this fast and quiet." We signed the agreement at a different notary's office. The money was transferred to a new account. Claire accompanied me to change the will. Daniel and Emily were left out of everything. Only Sarah would receive something, when she turned 25, not before, and no one else. For weeks I pretended everything was normal. I received my family with a smile. Emily was already talking to decorators. Daniel was measuring walls. Sarah brought drawings where she had already put her name on the door of what she thought was her new room. Meanwhile, I was secretly packing my most cherished belongings. The photos of Michael, the love letters, the old diaries, my mother's necklaces, the signed books, the vinyl records. I packed everything in discreet boxes, which I took out of the apartment little by little as if they were trash bags. No one noticed. The final sale signing happened on a Thursday morning. At 11:32 a.m., the apartment no longer belonged to me, nor to them. At 1:03 p.m., I changed the lock. At 4:03 p.m., I was settled in my new home, small, warm, with new curtains and the smell of mint. And that night, when Daniel arrived with Emily and Sarah to start the move, he found a new lock and a sign taped to the door that said, "Private property, restricted access." They called, they knocked, they yelled. But I was no longer there. Emily was the first to lose control. She pounded on the door as if each fist could break not just the wood, but the reality that was crashing down on them. "Linda, open this door right now. This is insane," she screamed, her voice sharp, tense, on the verge of breaking. Daniel, on the other hand, was silent, still glued to his phone, dialing my number over and over again, as if the sound of the ringing could restore the power he thought he had. I watched everything from the building across the street, sitting in the back seat of Claire's car. The tinted windows protected me like a veil. I saw their bodies move with anxiety, as if every second was another brick in the wall rising between us. "Don't say anything," Claire had warned me. "Let them scream. What hurts a manipulator most is silence." And she was right. The next day, the messages began, first the subtle ones. "Mom, we understand you're confused. Maybe someone is manipulating you. We can talk." Then the passive-aggressive ones. "I never thought you would do this to your own family." Then the dramatic ones. "Sarah is crying. She doesn't understand why her grandmother doesn't love her anymore." I saved everything. Screenshots, audio messages, videos. Claire had instructed me well. Everything had to be documented. The third person to enter the scene was David Daniels' brother-in-law, a two-bit lawyer who always thought he was smarter than everyone else. He wrote me a very long email with convoluted legal terms, telling me that what I had done could be considered an act of temporary mental incompetence, and that they might have to request a judicial review of my capacities. I reread that email 3 times, not because it scared me, but because I was impressed by the audacity. Wanting to take my apartment wasn't enough for them. Now they wanted my sanity. I didn't answer. Not a word. I just forwarded the email to Claire, who responded in less than an hour with an attached document. "Don't worry, they can't touch you now, but we're going to bulletproof everything in case they try to go further." I felt like I was in a spy movie, but it wasn't fiction. It was my life. 2 weeks passed. In that time, I changed my number, closed my social media accounts, and notified the few friends I still trusted not to share my new address. Emily posted a video on Facebook crying, literally crying, saying that her mother-in-law had been the victim of a scam, that her property had been sold without her realizing it. Daniel appeared in the background, holding Sarah with the face of a martyr. The title of the video was, "What would you do if your mother was deceived and you lost everything?" Thousands of views, comments from strangers calling me crazy, ungrateful, a cruel mother. A neighbor even left a note in the mailbox of my old building saying that ambition destroys families. But I didn't budge. I had spent too much time ignoring signs, doubting my instincts. Now I stood firm and had no intention of backing down. Every time I listened to those recordings of Emily screaming in my kitchen that this was already hers, I reminded myself why I had to keep going. Every time I saw the apartment floor plan with their notes, I remembered they weren't visitors. They were invaders. Claire accompanied me to the notary's office where I updated my will. I made it clear that Daniel would receive nothing. Absolutely nothing. No property, no money, no objects. The only exception was Sarah. I left her a letter, handwritten, sealed, that she couldn't open until she was 25. It said, "Dear Sarah, I hope one day you understand. Love is also about setting boundaries. Your grandmother loved you, but she couldn't let them destroy her in the name of family. It was the hardest thing separating an innocent child from the harm her parents were causing. But I also understood that true love isn't blind, it's brave, and sometimes saying no is the purest act of love." One afternoon, I received an unknown call. I didn't answer. A minute later, a voicemail. It was Daniel. His tone was different. There was no anger, just emptiness. "Mom, I don't know what happened. I don't know at what point you drifted away like this. I just wanted to help you. I wanted you to be okay, for you not to be alone. But now I don't know if we ever mattered to you." I pressed the phone against my chest. My hands trembled because a part of me wanted to believe his words. But I was no longer a naive woman. I knew what he was capable of. And I knew that voice was another mask, another manipulation. Claire recommended I leave the city for a few days. Disconnect. Refresh my soul. I went to a country house I rented in the mountains, a place with no service, no internet, just birds whined and the smell of wet earth. There I walked barefoot. I read aloud. I wrote in a journal. The pressure of being the perfect mother, the guilt of saying no, the fear of growing old and being seen as a burden. I cried for Michael, for the things we didn't say, for the times I was soft thinking that was love, for the silences that allowed them to mistake me for weak. And after crying, I began to heal. I returned a week later. The social media scandal had died down. Emily had deleted the video. David stopped writing. And Daniel disappeared. I heard nothing more from him. No calls, no letters, no visits. Only the echo of his absence. My new home wasn't as big, but it was mine. Every plant on the balcony had a name. Every cup had a story. Every silence was peace, not punishment. I woke up early. I made coffee with cinnamon, opened the windows, and let the light flood in without permission. On the wall, I hung a black and white photo of me with Michael smiling in a square in Savannah. I talked to him sometimes. I told him how I had defended myself, how finally I had chosen to live. One morning, opening the mailbox, I found a letter with no return address. Inside, a drawing from Sarah, a yellow sun, a house with flowers, and 3 figures, an older woman, a little girl, and a cat. Below, in crooked letters, it said, "For Grandma, I miss you." I felt a lump in my throat. I put the drawing in a wooden box next to Michael's letters. I closed the box. I didn't cry. I just caressed the lid and whispered, "Me too, my love. But I won't go back." And I didn't go back. Not to the old apartment. Not to the birthdays organized out of obligation. Not to the gatherings where I pretended not to notice Emily's disdain. Not to the dinners where Daniel spoke without looking at me. I didn't go back. And that was my act of love. Self-love. The world can judge. They can call me cold, calculating, resentful. But no one lived what I lived. No one heard what I heard behind closed doors. No one felt the emptiness of watching your own son plan your replacement while you're still breathing. I did. And that's why I chose to save myself. For weeks, the phone remained silent. No more messages. No more hidden calls. It was as if the world had finally understood my decision, or at least learned not to challenge it. There was something powerful in the silence. Not the empty silence of a house with no visitors, but the kind that blooms when you close doors that should never have been opened. The silence of having finally chosen not to be used. The silence of freedom, but calm like everything in life is fragile. It was a Tuesday morning as I was returning from the market, my bag full of tomatoes, warm bread, and fresh rosemary, that I saw him. Daniel standing leaning against the fence in front of my building. He had no flowers. He brought no gifts, just his arms crossed, a beard grown out, and his eyes filled with something I couldn't immediately decipher. Not sadness, not regret. It was something denser, more murky. I said nothing. I walked past him without looking, but his voice reached me anyway. "Mom, we need to talk." I stopped. Not out of desire, but out of habit, because no matter how much a woman has rebuilt her life, there's still an echo in her chest that answers a son's call. "We have nothing left to discuss," I replied without turning my head. "Emily is pregnant." He dropped it as if it were a wild card that justified everything. I closed my eyes for a second. I felt the mid-morning sun on the back of my neck. I took a deep breath. The rosemary in the bag released its earthy, sweet scent. And there in the middle of the sidewalk, I understood that what he was trying to do wasn't to reconcile. It was to reconquer lost ground. Emily was pregnant, and that made them once again deserving of my sacrifice, my property, my inheritance. I turned slowly. "And what does that have to do with me?" His expression cracked for an instant. Then he composed himself. "We need stability." "Mom, a home. You have a house all to yourself. You could come live with us. You could watch your granddaughter grow up. Your grandchildren." Every word was measured, calculated like poison in a wine glass. "Linda, think about it. We could turn a room into your space, a little sitting room with your things. You wouldn't be alone. You wouldn't have to worry about anything." The image was grotesque. Me reduced to a decorative figure wedged into a corner of a house that wasn't mine under rules I wouldn't set tolerated until I became a nuisance. I didn't answer. I just continued on my way. I walked up the stairs slowly, not because my legs hurt, but because I needed him to see every step, every inch of distance I chose to create. I went inside, closed the door, and had the lock changed again that very afternoon. 2 days later, I received a court notice. A petition for conservatorship for family assistance, which in real terms meant that Daniel was seeking to declare that I needed supervision for my financial decisions. It was signed by David. They attached a false psychological report where a specialist argued that my behavior was erratic, that there were signs of paranoia, and that the sale of the apartment had been an impulsive action resulting from an untreated emotional crisis. My hands felt cold as I read, not from fear, from indignation. It wasn't enough that they had wanted to snatch my space. Now they wanted to erase my judgment too, to turn me into an old woman, incompetent, manageable, fragile. I called Claire. I was expecting this. She told me with a fierce calm. "They don't know who they're messing with." Within 48 hours, we had our counterattack ready. Real medical report statements from neighbors, audio recordings of the veiled threats, and most importantly, evidence of the legitimate sale of the apartment without coercion before a notary with signed legal evaluations. Everything was bulletproof. We attended the hearing. I wore a navy blue dress, my hair up, discreet makeup. There was something profoundly humiliating in having to prove you still owned your own mind. But I stood firm. David didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. Daniel, however, watched me with empty eyes, as if he still didn't understand that this time his mother wasn't going to give in. When the judge delivered his decision, it was simple and blunt. No grounds are found to support the need for conservatorship. Mrs. Linda Miller retains full legal capacity. Not another word. Daniel said nothing on the way out. Emily didn't show up. I walked to Claire's car, feeling that each step returned a little more of the dignity they had tried to steal from me. The following days were quiet. Claire insisted I leave the country for a while, a short trip, to close this chapter, to experience something that didn't have Daniel's shadow or Emily's echo. I accepted. I went to Lisbon, a city Michael always wanted to visit and I always postponed. I settled into a small apartment overlooking the Tagus River. I walked through the cobblestone streets. I listened to fado music from open windows. I drank espresso in small cups. I was in no hurry. I was not afraid. I felt like a whole woman, for the first time in decades. One evening at a viewpoint at sunset, a woman approached me. "Are you alone?" "Yes," I answered without sadness. She smiled. "That's not always a bad thing." It wasn't. I was away for 3 weeks. I didn't receive a single message from Daniel. He didn't ask where I was. He didn't wish me a happy birthday, which fell on my second week in Lisbon. He didn't send a drawing from Sarah. Nothing. And that although it hurt, also confirmed everything. When I returned, I found my house intact. The plants green, the books in their place, the air still and clean. Claire was waiting for me with a lemon cake and a letter. It arrived by certified mail while you were away. I opened it. It was from David's office. One last attempt, a threat disguised as an apology. They wanted to mediate to repair the family relationship. I knew what that meant. They wanted a piece of what wasn't theirs. I burned the letter in my kitchen. I watched the paper curl blacken and turn to ash in the breeze coming through the window. Then I wiped the counter, like someone wiping away a final stain. The months passed. I never heard from them again. The peace that had seemed impossible settled in like a silent guest. I learned to enjoy the simple things: a well-made coffee, a book with the smell of new pages, the sound of rain on the roof. One day I found an old notebook of Michael's. It had Doodle's ideas, stray phrases. On one page, written in his tight handwriting, it said, "The greatest act of love is to stop allowing them to hurt you." I cried like I hadn't since it all began. And that was my catharsis. My son tried to take away the little I had left, but he failed. Because what I had wasn't just an apartment. It was my history, my memory, my decision. And that I'm not giving to anyone anymore. I got used to the sound of my own footsteps in the house again, to the way the wooden floor creaked in certain spots when I walked from the kitchen to the balcony, to the way the light filtered through the curtains at 6 p.m, painting everything in a melancholic golden color. It was a new silence different from before. It wasn't the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of choice, the silence of a woman who has cleaned every corner, not just of her home, but of her soul. Claire would sometimes come over for dinner. She brought wine, laughter, and an energy that contrasted with everything I had experienced in the previous months. We talked about literature, politics, travel, sometimes about what happened, but not as an open wound, but as a scar that no longer hurts to the touch. One autumn Saturday, while clearing some dry leaves from the building's garden, the doorman called me. "Mrs. Linda, there's a young woman asking for you." I saw her from a distance. It was Sarah. She had grown so much in so little time. She was no longer the shy girl who hid behind her mother. She wore a denim jacket, her hair down, and her eyes. I didn't know if she had come looking for answers or to cast blame. We went up to the apartment in silence. I offered her something to drink. She accepted. She sat on the sofa where we had read so many stories together, but this time the air was different. "Why did you do it, Grandma?" she asked directly. "Do what? Sell the apartment. Go away. Cut him off. Him." I looked at her for a long time. She was nervous but firm. She wasn't sent. She came with her own ghosts. Why was it necessary? I replied. Because if I hadn't, I would have lost myself. Sarah looked down. She fiddled with the cup in her hands. "Dad said you went crazy. That one day you woke up and decided to destroy everything." I smiled, but not with tenderness, with the kind of sadness only mothers know. "Do you believe that?" She shook her head. "I don't know. I just know that since it all happened, no one at home talks about you. Mom doesn't mention you." Dad changes the subject. And me, I don't understand anything. I got up, walked to the sideboard, and took out an envelope. It had been ready for a while. "Here you go," I said, handing it to her. "These are letters written for you. Since the first day everything broke. I didn't send them. I didn't want to poison you with our battles. But now, I think you deserve to know my side." Sarah took it like someone holding something fragile. She put it in her backpack without opening it. "Can I come again always?" And she left. I closed the door slowly, and I cried. Not from pain, but from relief, because for the first time I felt that some of the love I had sown in that family hadn't died completely. In the days that followed, I resumed my walks. I would go to the park to watch the children play, to read, to drink coffee on a bench where the sun hit my face directly. Sometimes I would run into old acquaintances. They would ask about Daniel, about the grandchildren. I answered evasively, not out of shame, but because I learned that some battles are not explained. They are lived, buried, and left there. One morning upon returning, I found an envelope under my door. No return address. Inside there was just one sheet of paper. "If you don't give me back what's mine, I will go to the furthest lengths." No signature, no date. Just that dry threat like a claw swipe. I called Claire. I told her. She asked me to scan the note and file it. Reporting it now wasn't worth it. But it was important to leave a trail in case something happened. I started noticing strange things. The intercom would buzz in the middle of the night. Someone would stand in front of the building motionless for long minutes. The hallway lights would turn on for no reason. There was no proof, but there was a presence. I didn't feel fear. I felt rage. One night I decided to stay awake. I sat in the living room with the lights off. The city breathed outside with its slow rhythm, and there at 3 a.m, I saw him. Daniel. Again. He didn't knock. He didn't shout. He just stood there in front of the gate. I took a photo from the window. Then another, and another. I sent them to Claire. "This is no longer legal," she wrote back. "Tomorrow morning we file for a restraining order." And so we did. The judge issued the order. Daniel could not come within 300 yards of me or my property. It was the last time I saw him. Sarah came back, with tears, with underlined letters, with questions, and little by little with certainties. "Dad always said you exaggerated," she told me. But reading this, I realize he manipulated everything. He used your love. He used our history. I nodded. Nothing needed to be added. "I want you to know I'm not on anyone's side," she continued, "but I do want to know your full story, not as a grandmother, as a woman." And so I did. I told her everything. From the beginning, from the first signs, from the first "Mom just lent it to us for a while," to the last closed door. She listened, without interrupting, and when I said goodbye, she only said, "Thank you for not giving up, for defending your voice." That night I slept with a peaceful heart. I knew the story wouldn't have a perfect ending, that there would be no dramatic reconciliations or movie-like embraces. But there was something better, justice, a quiet justice, intimate, woven with every decision I made. My apartment was now a sanctuary, not of loneliness, of integrity. I had lost a lot, but I had gotten myself back. And that, for a woman like me, was worth more than any inheritance. When Sarah closed the door that last time, I didn't know if she would be back. The house fell silent. But it wasn't a sad silence. It was one full of possibility, as if the echoes of the past were finally fading, giving me space to build something of my own, free from the voices that had judged, betrayed, or manipulated me. Weeks passed peacefully, my days filled with small rituals, coffee in the morning, with the newspaper open on the table and the sun filtering through the curtains, the plants on the balcony that I patiently tended to again, walks along the waterfront where I would sometimes stop to watch the water without thinking about anything. I started writing in a notebook with no intention of publishing, just to understand myself. Stray words, memories, thoughts I had never said out loud. It was like picking up the pieces I had left scattered over the years and putting myself back together. Until one morning, I received a call from the lawyer. His tone was serious, but not alarmed. "Linda, they have filed a challenge to the will. I didn't say anything I expected it. It's Daniel. He's claiming you were not in full possession of your mental faculties at the time you made the changes. He wants it declared invalid." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how pathetic the attempt was. "We have everything documented," I reminded him. "Signatures, witnesses, even the medical reports." "I know, and the judge will know it too. But prepare for the noise. This is going to hit the media. There are already journalists asking questions." And he was right. The next day, my face appeared on a sensationalist news website. Sun Tzu's mother for unjustly disinheriting him, accuses her of manipulation and irregular property sale. They used an old photo, one where I'm with Daniel and Sarah smiling in front of the Christmas tree. The headline was aggressive. The text worse, full of lies of phrases taken out of context of insinuations. But I didn't react. I didn't answer. I didn't call anyone. I just breathed, because I was already beyond all that. Claire helped me prepare a folder with evidence. Every document, every conversation, every date, all in order. We also included the letters I had written to Sarah and the messages she sent me in response, not because they were legally necessary, but because they were the thread that proved there was love, clarity, decision, not madness. The day of the hearing was gray. It was drizzling. I wore my dark blue coat and the scarf Christina gave me before she died. I entered the courthouse as one enters to close a story, not to fight one. Daniel was there. He didn't look at me. His lawyer presented absurd arguments. He talked about my age, my emotional fragility, a supposed cognitive decline. He said I had been the victim of a scam, that someone had surely convinced me to act this way, that I was not capable of making such drastic decisions alone. I watched him as if he were talking about another woman. I didn't recognize myself in anything he said. When it was my turn to speak, I did so calmly. I read a statement I had written the night before. I spoke of my history of my life with Daniel, of the signs I ignored, of the times I gave in, of the betrayal I experienced firsthand. I spoke of how I was forced to choose between maintaining a facade or saving my dignity. I chose the latter. The judge listened without interrupting. When I finished, he paused for a long time and then said what I already knew, that there was no evidence to declare the will invalid, that my actions were legal justified, and that the entire process had been carried out with full knowledge and consent. Daniel clenched his teeth. He said nothing. His lawyer gathered his papers, resigned. I walked out of the courthouse alone. I walked in the rain without an umbrella. I felt the water cleansing me. I stopped at a used bookstore. I bought a book of poetry and returned home as if coming back from exile. The following weeks were even calmer. No one knocked on my door again. No one else sent threats. Sarah visited me from time to time. She brought me drawings books, told me about her plans. She was studying psychology. She told me she wanted to specialize in family relationships. I think I have plenty of material to analyze. She joked one day and we both laughed. One afternoon, she asked me to read aloud one of the poems she had underlined. It was by Mario Benedetti. "Defend joy like a trench. Defend it from scandal and routine, from misery and the miserable." And I understood that I had done that without knowing it. I had defended my joy, my right to live in peace. I was offered an interview for a serious media outlet. A report on elderly people facing abuse from their own children. I hesitated, but I accepted. Not for revenge, but because if my story could help another woman my age to say enough is enough, it was worth it. The journalist was respectful. She listened more than she asked. In the end, she hugged me. Her eyes were moist. "Thank you for not staying silent," she said. When the report came out, the reaction was immediate. I received letters, messages, flowers. Unknown women who told me I had given them courage. One wrote, "Today I told my son not to manipulate me anymore. Thank you for showing me I'm not alone." And for the first time in a long time, I felt pride. Not for having defeated Daniel, but for having chosen myself. That night, I wrote my last letter. Not to Sarah, not to Daniel, to myself. Dear Linda, you survived. You stood tall when everything was crumbling. You chose silence when screaming was useless. You chose truth when lies offered you comfort. You chose dignity when fear pushed you to surrender, and now you are here, whole, free, alive. Thank you for not abandoning yourself. I closed the notebook. I put it in the box of memories, along with a picture of me as a child, a letter from my mother, and a dried sprig of lavender. Life went on, but so did I. And that at this age was more than enough. One morning while watering my plants, I noticed that one of the younger neighbors, Camila, was watching me from the other balcony. At first I thought she was just hanging laundry or looking at the sky, but when our eyes met, she smiled and raised a coffee cup as if in a toast. "Would you like to come have one with me?" she asked in a clear voice. I nodded. It had been a long time since I had accepted an invitation like that. I went up one floor, knocked on her door, and she welcomed me with a table already set freshly brewed coffee, homemade cookies, a lit candle. The atmosphere was warm as if she had been waiting for me for a long time. We talked for hours, about plants, books, music. She told me she had recently lost her mother and felt lonely. I told her in my own way parts of my story. She didn't need details to understand. "My mom used to say that sometimes you have to break the house from the inside for the sun to come in," Camilla said, looking out the window. "You seem like someone who learned that." Her words stayed with me for days. It was then that I decided to travel. Not far, a getaway to the coast, to the same town where I spent my honeymoon with Michael. I didn't go for nostalgia. I went to close circles. I stayed in a small inn overlooking the sea. Every morning I walked on the beach and wrote. Not letters, not memories. I wrote fictional stories, characters that came from me but were no longer me. I invented women who escaped, who built new lives, who planted trees and didn't look back. One of those stories became my favorite. It was about a woman who, after being betrayed by her own blood, built a library in a town without books. She didn't talk to anyone about the past. She didn't explain anything. She just offered new words to those who passed by. I thought about turning it into a book, but I was in no hurry. When I returned home, spring had begun. My plants were blooming. The lavender, the mint, even the jasmine I thought was dead, showed new shoots. That night I lit a candle. Not for nostalgia, for celebration. I had returned to myself. And even though Daniel was still talking, even though he tried to clean up his image, even though some still looked at me with doubt or whispers, I no longer needed to explain. I owed nothing to anyone. Freedom has a taste you don't forget. The days passed, and I received a handwritten letter with no visible return address. The envelope had my full name and a handwriting that seemed familiar. I opened it carefully. It was from Michael. Not the Michael I had loved, but the Michael who had disappeared from my life without saying goodbye. Daniel's father, absent for decades. "Linda, I found out about everything late. About you, about our son, about how it all ended. I don't know if I have the right to write to you, but I'm doing it anyway. I was a coward. I left without knowing what I was leaving behind. I failed everyone, but especially you. I read your story. I heard it. And I have no words, only a wish, that you find peace, that what I broke you were able to heal." I didn't cry. There were no tears for that, just a strange feeling, as if life were closing a door I had forgotten was open. I saved the letter, not for what it said, but for what it symbolized. The past, acknowledging that it no longer had power over me. On the last day of that week, Sarah brought me a gift, a wooden box hand-painted. "For your new stories," she said, "the ones you're going to write now." Inside was a fountain pen, a hardcover notebook, and a small bottle of blue ink. On the first page, she wrote a single line, "I didn't inherit your house, but I inherit your strength." I hugged her as if it were the last time. That night, I wrote again. But not about pain or loss. I wrote about a garden growing among ruins, about a woman who, even with scars, danced alone in the rain, about silence as a form of victory, and about forgiveness, not as a gift to the other, but as a closure one gives to oneself. I ended the story with a sentence that, without knowing it, defined me. I didn't leave. I found myself. And this time I slept without nightmares, because I was finally free. I never imagined that silence could weigh more than a scream. But at that stage of my life, I realized that silence also speaks. Sometimes it screams from within, like an echo no one else hears, but that resounds in your bones. And in those days, everything around me was wrapped in that kind of silence. Thick, dense, almost tangible. It wasn't loneliness, it was something else. A long pause before a new act. I was no longer the woman I was before. I was not the accommodating mother. Nor was I just the victim. I had transformed into something new, something stronger, but also colder, more calculating. I surprised myself thinking about my next steps with surgical precision. I observed, listened, planned, as if my whole life had become a chessboard. And I finally understood the rules. Daniel, meanwhile, kept trying. He knew he had lost, but his ego wouldn't let him accept that a 62-year-old woman, his mother, had won the game. So he started looking for cracks, small fissures to re-enter. He appealed to everything. The press, social media acquaintances, even old friends of mine I hadn't seen in years. I received messages loaded with false concern. "Linda, we heard what happened. Are you okay? Do you need anything?" At first I hesitated. I thought maybe someone really cared, but a brief conversation was enough to see the script. Leading questions, empty compliments, subtle comments to induce me to say something out of place. I didn't fall for it. I had removed Daniel from my will, sold the apartment without his knowledge, changed all the locks and disappeared from his maps. But it wasn't over. There was one last move, the definitive one. I contacted my lawyer. I asked for advice on a legal concept a friend had told me about. The declaration of unworthiness to inherit. It wasn't enough to disinherit him. I wanted that upon my death he couldn't even challenge anything, nor claim what wasn't his. I wanted to cut all the roots that legally connected him to me. The process was complex. It was necessary to prove that his actions had been serious enough to justify such a measure. But I had proof. Videos, messages, witnesses, everything documented. And above all, I had my word. My truth which no longer hid or apologized for existing. While we prepared the documentation, I made another decision. I sold my second apartment. The small one I still owned in a more distant neighborhood. With that money, I did something I never thought I would do. I bought a small property in a coastal town in the south, a one-story house with a garden in front and fruit trees in the back, a place where no one knew me, where I could start over, where neither Daniel nor his stories could reach me. But I didn't move right away. I needed to close some doors first, and one of them was Sarah. The last time we saw each other, she told me she didn't want to choose between her father and me. But the real world doesn't always allow for neutrality. As the months went by, I realized her silence was a choice, a way to protect herself, yes, but also to leave me alone. She never wrote to me. She never asked how I was. She never showed up. So I wrote one last letter, not to blame her, not to hurt her, just to tell her the truth. "Sarah, I don't expect you to choose. You already did. I'm not going to judge you. Everyone carries their story as they can, but sometimes silence is also a betrayal. And in the darkest moments I looked for you and you weren't there. I hold no grudge. I just wanted you to know that I loved you very much. And although I no longer expect anything from you, I wish you the peace and freedom I finally found." I didn't sign it with Mom, just with my name, Linda. I left it in her mailbox on a rainy morning. I didn't wait for a reply. The day I signed the sale of the apartment, I felt a strange relief. It wasn't sadness. It was as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. It wasn't just brick and mortar I was leaving behind. It was years of pain, of concessions, of forced silences. With the deed signed, I took a taxi. I picked up my few belongings. I had already given away or sold almost everything, and I headed south. The journey was long. We crossed endless roads, open fields, silent curves. I had headphones on but didn't play any music. I preferred the sound of the engine, the wind, the slight rattle of the wheels on the asphalt. I arrived at sunset. The house was just as I remembered it, simple, cozy, bright. A neighbor, Julia, welcomed me with a loaf of homemade bread. She told me that if I needed anything, I shouldn't hesitate to knock on her door. I thanked her, but I knew I wanted to live this stage alone in silence at my own pace. The first few days, I dedicated myself to cleaning, organizing, planting some seeds in the garden. Lavender, mint, jasmine. I reconnected with the earth, with the smell of dampness, with the creaking of wood, with the singing of birds at dawn. And then one night the news reached me. Daniel had been reported for fraud. Not by me, by another woman, an ex-girlfriend. He had forged documents, manipulated bank accounts, taken out loans in her name. The scandal was all over the media. His face, the same one that had yelled at me in front of my old door, was now everywhere. No longer as a grieving son, but as a scammer. I felt no satisfaction, no revenge, just a sigh, as if the universe finally was putting things in their place. I saved the news article in a folder, not for resentment, for the record, for justice. A week later, Sarah wrote to me. A brief email, no greeting. I saw what happened with Dad. I don't know what to say. I just hope you're okay. I didn't reply. It was too late. I had crossed a threshold from which I would not return. My new house had a large window overlooking the sea. Every morning I would sit there with a cup of tea watching the sun rise over the waves. It was a ritual, a way of reminding myself that time goes on, that even after the fiercest storms the day arrives. One afternoon, while watering my plants, I found a note under the door. It was from Julia, the neighbor. She was inviting me to a poetry reading at the town library. I hesitated, but I went. I entered silently. I sat in the last row. An old man was reading verses from his late wife. A little girl recited a poem she made up about clouds, and then, without knowing how, they offered me the microphone. I took it. I took a deep breath. I read one of my texts for the first time. I didn't leave. I found myself. The room fell silent. And then they applauded, not for the talent, but for the truth. That day I understood that I didn't need to get revenge on anyone, that the deepest victory is to live without fear, without debts, without depending on another's forgiveness. That night I lit a candle, not for nostalgia, for gratitude, because I was alive, and finally free. Time doesn't heal, but it settles, like old wine that at the bottom of the bottle holds its most bitter essence. That's how the weeks following my reading at the library were. Each day brought a different breeze, a new smell, an unexpected feeling. I would wake up early, water the plants, walk on the beach, read a forgotten book from the living room shelf, but always at some point the memory would return, not with pain, more with a strange mix of relief and vertigo, as if I were peering into an abyss that could no longer swallow me. I didn't regret anything, but I didn't celebrate either. It was a strange calm, dense, silent. One afternoon, while walking through the town market, I noticed something different. A look, a whisper, a gesture. At first I thought it was my imagination, but when I got home I confirmed it. In the mailbox was a letter, no return address, no postage stamp, just my name, written in a familiar hand, inside a sheet of paper, a single sentence. "You're going to destroy us all." The handwriting was Daniel's. It didn't surprise me. It didn't scare me either, but it left me thinking. Who was he referring to with us? Him and Sarah, the family in general, his allies. The truth is, I hadn't destroyed anyone. I had only protected what I had left, my peace, my freedom, my truth. But I understood that for some that was already a threat. I put the note in a drawer, not because I feared anything, but because everything could be useful later. I was meticulous. With that, every word, every gesture, every veiled threat was now part of my personal file. Not out of paranoia, out of precaution. That same night I received a call. Hidden number. I didn't answer. Seconds later, a voicemail arrived. Sarah's voice. "Mom, I know you don't want to hear from us, but there are things I don't know how to handle. Dad is getting more and more erratic. He says you're spying on him, that you're planning to ruin his life. I don't know what to do. Sometimes he scares me." Pause. I'm not calling to ask for anything. I just needed to say it. Another pause. A sigh. "I miss you." I turned off the phone. I didn't cry. I didn't answer. I was no longer moved. The half-sentences, the lukewarm affections. I learned that love shouldn't hurt, and that whoever chooses silence during the shipwreck doesn't deserve the helm when the calm arrives. But something in that message unsettled me. Daniel was losing control, and a desperate man is capable of anything. The following days were strangely calm. Julia, my neighbor, brought me some cookies. I went to the book club. I bought a bicycle. I felt light. But something told me that this peace was just the prelude, and I wasn't wrong. One morning, upon opening the door, I was met with a camera, a man with a microphone, another with headphones, a young journalist with a serious face and an affected tone. Linda Miller. I nodded silently. We are doing a report on family conflicts over inheritances. Your case has gained notoriety on social media. Would you like to give your side of the story? I closed the door without saying a word. I wasn't surprised. Daniel had friends in the media. He knew how to manipulate narratives. He was an expert at playing the victim, and he had surely leaked information, distorted facts, shown only one part of the story, the part that benefited him. That night, the report aired. Julia showed it to me, her face filled with indignation. The mother disinherited him on a whim. He only wanted to help her move. He accused her of betrayal, of emotional theft, a story that moves the whole country. The images were edited with sad music. Photos of us when he was little, birthday videos, snippets of audio recordings. A testimony from an anonymous woman surely paid who claimed I had always been manipulative. I couldn't help but laugh, not out of amusement, but out of absurdity, at the ease with which a life can be twisted. And then I understood. Daniel wasn't seeking justice. He was seeking public revenge, to destroy my image, to ridicule me, to force me to respond, to play his game. But I wasn't playing anymore. I gave my answer in my own way. I went to a notary's office with my lawyer. We drafted a public document where I explained without attacks or names that I had been a victim of psychological manipulation, that I took legal measures to protect myself, and that I did not wish to feed the media circus. The notary published it as an open letter, on paper. No social media, no interviews. I left it in silence. The media, of course, didn't cover it. But something changed. A week later, I received another letter, this time handwritten. From Sarah, Mom. I saw everything, the report, your letter. I feel like I'm in the middle of a war that I never wanted, but I can't pretend anymore. Dad is out of his mind. He follows me, checks my phone. He accuses me of being on your side. I'm scared. I don't want to live like this. Pause, more text. More. I realize now that I was wrong to leave you alone. I thought I could stay neutral, that everything would resolve itself, but it didn't. You acted with dignity. He with hatred. Last paragraph. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I know it's not enough. But I want to start over. If you'll let me. I read the letter several times. I didn't know what to feel. I left it on the table. I went out to the garden. I breathed. And I remembered something my mother once said when I was young and proud. Forgiveness is not a door. It's a crack where the light can enter. I went back inside. I wrote a brief reply. Sarah, wars end when someone lays down their arms. I'm not waiting for you. But if you come in peace, I'll be here. I sent it by mail. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, but it wasn't the end. The next day, I found the garden gate forced, a plant uprooted, a fleeting figure that fled through the bushes. I called the police. I didn't report anyone, but I made a record of it. Daniel had crossed a line, and I had to put an end to it. The police arrived quickly that morning. 2 young officers, polite but skeptical. They asked if there were cameras witnesses, anything more than a suspicion. I showed them the bent gate, the footprints in the damp earth, the broken pot. One of them nodded with a look of resignation. It could be anything, ma'am. But we'll record the incident. They took notes, gave me a stamped paper, and left as if it were a childish prank. But I knew it wasn't a thief. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a message. A warning. I filed the police report with the other documents in the black folder on my desk. The one labeled legal backup. By that point, my house was no longer just my sanctuary. It was a fortress. Everything I did, said, or received was recorded. I had learned that in a war of attrition, the best weapon is consistency. That afternoon, while making coffee, the doorbell rang. I peeked out cautiously. It was Sarah. No makeup, no jewelry, no car. Alone. She clutched her coat. I crossed the garden and opened the door without a word. "Can I come in?" she asked in a trembling voice. I nodded. She walked slowly to the living room as if each step weighed years. We sat in silence. For a while, the only sounds were the ticking of the clock and the steam from the coffee maker. "I didn't know where to start," she finally said. "I've been speechless many times, but I can't do this anymore." I offered her a cup. She took it in her hands as if it were a lifeline. "Daniel is overwhelmed. I lost him. Or did he lose himself? I don't know, but every day is worse. He accuses me of betrayal, of conspiring with you. He checks my calls, he controls my schedule. I don't even know who he is anymore." I looked at her calmly. "And now you've come to ask me for what—" Sarah was not a question. It was a line, a boundary. She understood. "No, I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted to tell you I was wrong, and that if you ever want to rebuild something with me, I'll be there. No conditions." Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. "I hear you," I finally said. "That's all I can promise right now." She nodded. She stood up. She hugged me without squeezing, and she left. When I closed the door, I felt a weight lifted. It wasn't forgiveness or reconciliation. It was the end of a weight. I no longer carried the need to be understood. I had said everything, done everything, shown everything. The rest was not up to me, but what was up to me was about to be resolved. That same night, I received a court notice. Daniel was suing me for wrongful eviction and financial manipulation. I read every page carefully. Empty words, phrases drafted by an expensive lawyer. He intended to prove that I was not in full possession of my faculties, that I had been influenced by external elements, and that my change of will was the product of psychological pressure. The document was a mix of insult and threat, but it didn't shake me. I was prepared. My lawyer, the same one who helped me sell the apartment in secret, responded in record time. He presented all the evidence: Daniel's letters, the messages, the recordings, the prior police reports, the sale conducted in full faculty, the will updated with witnesses and a notary. But there was something else, something I had been saving just in case this moment came: an audio recording. One night weeks ago, while I was talking on the phone with Christina, Danielle had accidentally left a message on my voicemail. He thought he had already hung up, but he hadn't. In that unintentionally recorded message, he could be heard talking to someone, maybe a lawyer, maybe a friend, and saying verbatim, "She'll fall on her own, she's old, she's alone, a couple of good articles in the media, a couple of posts with old photos, and that's it. No one's going to question if we have her committed." My lawyer listened to it 3 times. He looked at me in silence and said, "This doesn't just close your defense, this sinks him." We submitted the audio as part of the case file. We added the police report. We included Sarah's letter as voluntary testimony. And then we did something more. We requested a preemptive restraining order. The judge, upon reading the material, did not hesitate. Daniel was prohibited from coming within 500 yards of my home. No calls, no messages, no social media, no contact through third parties. When he received the notification, his response was immediate. A video. He posted a 3-minute clip on his social media, crying, accusing me of disloyalty, of destroying his family, of brainwashing his wife, of leaving him with nothing. The images were manipulated. He used clips from birthdays, photos of me laughing with him as a child, family scenes taken out of context. But he made a mistake. He included an image taken inside my old house on a date after the sale, a photo where he appeared on the balcony, with a glass of wine, as if he still lived there. What he didn't know was that on the exact date of that photo, I had already changed the lock. He shouldn't have had access, and yet he had entered. That detail helped us expand the complaint. Trespassing, invasion of privacy, disobeying a court order. The judge, seeing the repeated offenses, was clear. Are we dealing with a systematic campaign of harassment and manipulation? He authorized more severe measures. He included digital monitoring. and he summoned Daniel to testify. I meanwhile maintained my routine intact: garden reading, silence, peace. But inside me, something was beginning to blossom. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. One morning I got a call from the courthouse. Mrs. Miller. Mr. Daniel Miller appeared this morning accompanied by a defense attorney, but he refused to testify. However, due to the accumulation of evidence, the judge has decided to proceed with a public hearing. Are you willing to attend? I nodded. It was time. The hearing was set for the following Thursday, in an old building with tall columns and long echoes. I sat in the front row next to my lawyer. Daniel arrived half an hour late, dark suit, martyr's face. The judge called for silence, read the file, presented evidence, played the audio read. Sarah's letter showed the photo from the balcony. He asked if Daniel wished to make a statement. He only muttered that it had all been a misunderstanding. But it was too late. The judge was firm. Not only is there no indication of manipulation on the part of Mrs. Miller, there is clear evidence of persecution, coercion, and improper use of public media to denigrate her image. The verdict was brief: restraining order extended for 2 years, an order to remove all defamatory public content, a fine for moral damages, a ban on contact, and a symbolic closing. The judge, in a low voice, said sometimes cutting ties is healing. When I left the courthouse, the sun hit my face like a caress. I didn't feel glory or triumph. I felt freedom, and that was all I needed. The week after the trial was on the surface quiet. No unfamiliar cars circled the block. No envelopes without a return address arrived in the mailbox. No one knocked on my door. No one shouted my name from the gate. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same as before. This wasn't the silence of waiting, but of the aftermath, the kind that comes when a war ends, and all that's left is the sound of the wind over the ruins. Sarah sent me a handwritten letter. She told me she had moved into a boarding house in Miami Beach, that she had gotten a part-time job at a bookstore, and that every night she read excerpts from Clarice Lispector to fall asleep. She wished me peace. She didn't ask for anything. She signed in purple ink like she used to when she was young. I didn't reply, not out of anger or coldness, but because it was no longer necessary. We had closed that chapter with dignity, and I had learned that not all goodbyes require words. Some just happen, like the leaves falling from the tree when autumn comes. They make no sound. They just go. Christina, for her. Part came every Tuesday. We drank jasmine tea in the garden. We talked about simple things, recipes, news, neighborhood anecdotes. But every now and then, in the gaps of conversation, we would let a phrase slip about. Them. Not as someone reliving a wound, but as someone pointing to a scar that no longer hurts. One day, however, she brought me a gift. A small olive bonsai tree. So you remember that some roots, though slow, always grow strong. I put it on the windowsill. Every morning I looked at it when I woke up, and though it seemed fragile, it withstood all the winds. One March afternoon, I decided to do something I had been putting off for years. I went to the attic. I climbed slowly, flashlight in hand. Dust, old boxes, winter clothes, photos, books, notebooks with dog-eared pages. I knelt in front of the blue trunk, the one that had belonged to my mother. I opened it. Inside, among other things, was the blanket we had knitted together during the cold nights of my adolescence, and a cardboard box of postcards. One in particular caught my eye. It was of a park on the coast of Maine with an empty bench facing a lake. On the back, my mother's handwriting. The important thing is not that you stay, it's that you know when to leave when you're no longer needed. I read that sentence out loud several times. And I understood. I understood that my role as a mother was not to cling, but to let go. It wasn't to protect at all costs, but to set boundaries. It wasn't always to correct, but to say this far and no further. Daniel was no longer my child. He had chosen his path, and though it hurt, it was no longer my responsibility to fix what he decided to break. That same day, I sat down at the computer. I wrote a brief message, clear, unadorned. I sent it to my lawyer. I want to make one last change to the will. In the new version, in addition to excluding Daniel, I stipulated that upon my death, a significant portion of my assets would be donated to an organization that supported older women in situations of economic or emotional abuse. Women like me, I told the notary as I signed, who endured for love, for fear, for habit, and one day said enough. He looked at me with respect, stamped the document, handed me a copy. I felt light, as if suddenly all the years of burden had been left behind. The weeks followed their course. The leaves fell. The afternoons grew shorter. I started walking along the boardwalk every morning. I greeted the neighbors. I bought fresh flowers. I learned to make whole wheat bread. I went back to writing in my journals. One night it was raining hard, the kind of rain that beats on the roofs like a confession. I made myself a mint tea, turned on the corner lamp, and sat down to read. The sound of the rain mixed with the soft music from the vinyl record. In the midst of that quiet, my gaze fell on a framed photo. Me young, with Daniel in my arms. We were both smiling. He had a red cap, I a white linen dress. I approached, took it in my hands, and without much thought placed it in a box, closed it, and stored it at the back of the closet. Not to forget him, but to let go of the version of him that no longer existed. Because part of grieving is understanding that you can't live forever in the portrait of a memory, that you have to make space for other images, other memories, other ways of being. The next day, I donated several items: clothes, notebooks, cushions, books. I no longer read. The house breathed deeper. The silence was kind. The light came in unobstructed. I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. I watched the bonsai. The olive tree had a new leaf. I smiled. Christina arrived with croissants. We laughed about unimportant things. We talked about the neighbor's cat, about a documentary on television. She asked if I was planning to travel. Maybe, I said. Maybe to the coast of Maine. There's a bench in front of a lake I want to see. She looked at me with a knowing glance. Then you're ready. I nodded. At that moment, I understood something. Not all rebirths are explosive. Some happen quietly. There are no fireworks, no ovations, just a serene certainty that we are alive, and that this time, no one holds the keys to our house or our body or our name. One day I opened the closet and found my white linen dress. I put it on and went out into the garden. The sun caressed my skin. The air smelled of damp earth and rosemary. Bees buzzed around the flowers. I sat on the bench under the lemon tree. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't think about the past or the trial or the screams or the betrayals, not even about revenge. I thought about myself, about what I had saved, about what I had rebuilt, about what, despite everything, could still flourish. And then, without hurry, without drama, without tears, I said in a low voice, "They never touched my name again." Then I got up. I went into the house, turned off the phone, and opened the window.